Welcome back to the Art of Conflict. This is the next part in our series on how to address conflict in a way that actually builds trust. Today, we're going to start with a powerful review, so let's jump in. Okay, let's take a minute and review. The first step in this process of the art of conflict is to assess. Now, it would be easy to jump into assessing everyone else who's involved in the conflict, but you have to start with yourself first. To assess yourself, you have to ask questions like, how do I feel? Am I angry, upset, or frustrated for any reason? Or do I have clarity on what is actually going on? If you can answer these questions and you are in a place of peace and a productive mindset, then you can move forward. The second part of the assessment process is to think from the other person's perspective. This is where you want to get curious to learn about the other person instead of making assumptions. This is where you can ask questions like, is this normal behavior for this person? Or, why might this person be feeling this way? Another one might be, how could I approach this person in a way that we could both be heard? Last but not least, am I making any assumptions about how this person feels without having asked them? These questions and questions like these will help shed light on the other person's experience, which will help you to navigate the conflict more successfully. The final phase of this first step of the art of conflict is to ask yourself, what do I want the outcome to be? We call this beginning with the end in mind. Do I want them to pay for what they've done? Or do I want them to take responsibility for their actions and learn from their mistakes? Or maybe it's that I need to ask the question, do I need to set clear expectations and boundaries with them? One of the things that we've discovered is that we often don't have successful conflict because we make assumptions about what the other person is feeling or thinking. And this almost always leads to a blow-up. So this is the first step in the art of conflict. Assess. What's going on, starting with yourself, and then moving out to the other person, and then to the final outcome that you're hoping to have happen. Now let's dive into the second step of the art of conflict, which is to connect. Okay, so we've covered part one of how to begin to address conflict, which is that you have to assess yourself. You start with you move out into how the other person might be experiencing this conflict and see it from their perspective, and then you begin with the end in mind. What do you actually want to have happen out of this conflict? Now, the next phase of the art of conflict is that we want to move towards connection. And what I like to say is that the goal of healthy conflict is actually connection. Because if you have conflict and it blows the connection up, then you will not have been successful in that moment of conflict. But if you have the conflict and it bonds you together, then that conflict became successful. And see, the reason why we self-assess is because if we get in that place of reactivity, it kills connection. So when we start to move towards connection and when we start to move towards connecting with the other person, it's not just because we want to absolve them or make them not responsible for their habits or their behaviors or their hang-ups that are messing up our leadership moment, but it's because the pathway to helping people move through and change those behaviors is actually to have a moment of connection with you as the leader, where you can help them see why their actions are impacting others and how they might change it. And so the goal of connection is that it's me and you versus the problem instead of me versus you. Now, I want to quote an owner in Beehive, and his name is Jeff Humphreys. And Jeff and I were talking about conflict recently, and he pointed out, you know, Aaron, sometimes you need to be heard before you can be disturbed. And I loved that quote because it's so true. People actually need to feel heard before their ideas can be challenged. They need to feel heard before you can challenge them on their behavior. And so often we step into that moment of conflict, not with a desire to connect with them, but with a desire to punish them or crush them. And we don't even stop to listen or hear from their perspective or lead with curiosity. And it's often that that curiosity and that desire to connect that will help a person to actually want to listen to you so that you can change the outcome of that conflict. So as we wrap up this little section on connection and connecting with others, I just want to remind you of something. Connection doesn't mean that you absolve people of boundaries. It doesn't mean that you no longer have accountability. Actually, what connection means is you have accountability at an even deeper level. It's not just you and the rules versus the person. When you go for connection, what happens is it's you and the rules and how those things come together to help make you a stronger person. So if I'm having a moment of conflict with you and I'm leading from connection, I don't want you just to follow the rules because that's such an entry-level thing. I want you to be able to embody the values of what we're doing together and why it matters to be a part of this team and how your choices affect all of us and how if you do this well, you're going to grow as a person and it's going to make you stronger. Do you see how that connection digs deeper than just the surface? That's where the power of connection is. You assess yourself so that you can get perspective, and you assess the other person so you can try and gain understanding, and you think through what's the end in mind that I want so that when you step into the actual conflict and you lead from a place of connection, what happens is the other person feels heard so that then you can challenge them and call them up, not call them out, but call them up into their potential. And that's what connection does.